So Sian, this is a bit of a get to know you and what you plan to do if you become mayor. Obviously, you have stood for London mayor twice before. I think we've been out on the campaign trail on two previous occasions, and last time you came third, is that right?
And I came first on second preferences,
and first on
very interesting.
And given the sort of the uncertainties of political times and the realignment of the main political parties, second preference votes are probably going to be quite important this time round. So I've got a few questions for you. We've got about 15 minutes. I'm afraid we're not opening this one up to the audience. But I first of all wanted to ask you this time round, what is going to be your number one manifesto promise? What's the first thing you would want to do on entering the 8th floor at City Hall should you win the election?
Obviously, climate change is the emergency that we've got at the moment. We need a green mayor because we've got 10 years to sort this out. The next 4 years are where we're going to do all the heavy lifting towards new climate targets. And at the moment, Sadiq Khan doesn't have the right target. He's still aiming for 2050. He says that's compatible with Paris. But the IPCC tells us that the Paris Agreement only gives us a 50% chance of avoiding runaway climate change. We can't afford to fail at this. We can't have empty promises left on the shelf at the end of the next 4 years. We've got to fill all the gaps, and I think that's why we need a green mayor. And obviously, setting a new target will be the number one thing. But quite honestly, we've got so many problems in London now. You know how people have their desert island discs, there are 8 discs in their head constantly. I think I've got my first 8 mayoral decisions pretty much sorted in my head at any one time, and they're all vying for that last place. But there's so much that needs sorting out. We've got to reset the London plan, absolutely needs a review as soon as possible. We've got to be getting together with those councils around London, starting to put forwards ideas for parliamentary bills, things that really just wrest devolution from the government. It's no good asking nicely for these new powers. We've got to be campaigning for them with our 8.5 million Londoners.
So obviously, the environment is the Greens' USP. We wouldn't expect anything other than that. But the Green Party has got a Remain stance as strong as the Lib Dems, and you obviously like to see yourselves as radical as Labour on social and economic policy. What is it about you as an individual candidate, when lined up against the others, that you think will persuade Londoners to back you rather than one of the bigger parties?
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's that combination of all three things. A really strong stance on Brexit. We've been calling for the people's vote since the very start. You know we're the only ones you can really trust on the environment, where succeeding too slowly is failing. You need someone you can trust to get things done. And then, yeah, we've you know the Greens on the London Assembly, been there for 20 years, making a real difference on social issues too. You know that there was a budget deal between Jenny Jones, Darren Johnson and Ken Livingstone that brought in the living wage unit, for example. We've always been leading the way on those. And I think it's that combination of things, the record that we have, and the fact that it's just time now for London to have a green mayor. We don't want to be left behind other cities around the world.
So obviously we have a general election before we have the mayoral election, and one of your jobs is co-leader of the Green Party, so presumably you're going to be quite focused on that for the next 6 weeks or so. But obviously Londoners may want something different from their mayor than they want from their national government, not least Brexit being a national issue rather than one that's really a policy issue for City Hall. What do you think Londoners are going to be looking for next May that they're not now?
I think they want a new mission for our city. They want something where we all feel like we're working together and using our voices and our hands and our feet and our skills to make London better for ourselves. I think one of the big criticisms we have of the mayor is that he quite often, when he reaches a difficulty, turns around and blames the government, blames the powers that he doesn't have. I've seen that over rent controls, over quite a lot of time. We've seen it over police numbers. And I think if you've got 8.5 million people, we can get almost anything done between us. And if we haven't got the powers, we can mobilise those 8.5 million people to ask for them.
How would you get those extra powers that a Labour mayor wasn't able to get initially from a Labour government, and Conservative mayor wasn't necessarily able to get from a Conservative government? Obviously, the powers of City Hall have increased over time, but they're still not as much as you would like.
No, they're not. And I think we need to be campaigning for this. I'm a campaigner by trade. That's what I was up until I was a London Assembly member. And I think we need to be working with the mayors of other cities. And I think over time, the case has been building and building and building for more devolution, for more tax-raising powers, like the Mayor mentioned earlier on. I think in terms of planning, we need absolute devolution. I don't think there's any reason why London's Mayor should not be able to set every single planning policy for London. And that's quite an easy ask if you're talking about putting a bill through Parliament with the support of London's MPs, London's councils, doing that with the mayors of Manchester and Bristol, where we're hopefully going to have a Green Mayor next May as well. I think that's a simple change, and we can build the case for it really clearly and get it done.
It's about campaigning with them rather than having necessarily a direct line to whoever's in number 10.
I think we have all the different tools at our disposal. As Mayor of London, you'd get to have meetings with the ministers. But I think the Mayor's not been very successful at that so far. And I think you need to use the wider tools. You need to get your allies from business, from civil society. You need to get your individual citizens all behind something. And then it has to change. It's like with rent controls. I mean, the Mayor wasn't going to be in favour of rent controls. He spent 2.5 years sitting in Mayor's Question Time when I asked about it, saying, "Oh, Sian, the government's not going to give us rent controls. Quiet yourself down." I did this last year, last November and December. He was still saying it. And then, the campaigning from Generation Rent, from the London Renters Union, which is a new group, the work we've done putting political pressure on in the London Assembly, he changed his mind. And now he's using that as part of his election platform. That's a huge victory for campaigning, and the government is just as susceptible to this as the Mayor was.
And of course, you're somebody who's rented the whole time I've known you. You're still...
I still rent
the
same flat as I lived in 2016.
The same flat. So you seem to be suggesting that some of the issue is actually about the individual in the role of the Mayor, but actually how much of the problem is about the structure of the GLA, which is obviously 20 years old, the structure of the GLA itself? Does the Mayoralty have enough powers, or is that something that national government should be looking at reforming?
I mean, national government needs to look at it, but within City Hall, I think the Assembly needs more powers as well. We've done an awful lot of work over the years, raising issues, putting ideas forwards as the Assembly. But I think if the Assembly could initiate decisions, if we could have more say rather than just once a year a budget vote for the Mayor, that would make a huge difference.
So would you do that if you were Mayor? Because lots of people say the Assembly's a rather toothless organisation. But if you were Mayor, you'd be happy to be held to account by giving it more power?
I think so. I mean, I worry that Mayor's Question Time, I mean, you saw earlier on how the Mayor was able to talk and talk and talk. Mayor's Question Time once a month is just training for the Mayor to use up our time, and we're all on the clock. And for a group like ours, it's really frustrating that the Mayor will just keep talking when we're trying to get answers out of him. I think we do need to have more of a say so that he knows if he doesn't answer our questions, there will be consequences.
There's a degree of political fatigue amongst the British electorate. We seem to have had referenda after referenda, election after election. We're in another one now. Do you think that this mayoral election will actually get quite a lot of public attention? Do you think people will care enough to come out and vote?
I think it does, and it's a different election to the general election. And actually, the European elections this year, they had the second highest turnout of any European election. And you think that people are fed up and they don't want to vote anymore, but actually, I think people are feeling more and more like they want to have their say, like with the huge movement to have a people's vote. So I think it'll be a lively election, and I think people will judge it on different issues. The last poll that we know about that was taken for London was right in the middle of the European election campaign. And in that, my vote went up from 6%, which is what I got in the last mayor election, to 16%. And that was a higher increase in vote than what happened with the Lib Dems. And that bucks the trend for what happened in the European elections in London. So people, even right in the middle of that election, were thinking differently about the mayoralty. They were looking at the record of the
But do you
Greens
think that the European election results can really be translated to the mayoralty? Because obviously that was
no, that's exactly what I'm saying. They're different. That's the point. No, there was a poll for the mayoralty that gave a different result to what was happening in the European elections. And I think that does mean Londoners are already engaged in this debate and already looking forward to see who they want to.
And how can you personally motivate them more?
I think I'll be going out around London. I work with an awful lot of campaign organisations and ones that feel let down by the current mayor, who are campaigning for changes in government policy, like the renters groups, like the groups trying to get more community-led housing, which is something that's been very, very slow to get going in London, and groups campaigning for higher wages. We really need to look at the living wage. We need to look at the living rent that the mayor's calculating. There's big flaws in those calculations that need that sort of detailed scrutiny from community groups, from residents, and need a champion for those during the election, and that's what I'll be doing. And I think people are up for a change. People are up for London leading the way and being the first to elect a Green mayor in the UK. And we've just seen a Green mayor elected in Colombia's capital, Bogota. We've got a Green mayor in Amsterdam. There's no reason why London shouldn't be following suit and starting to really push for the world-leading place we should have in terms of climate change, in terms of transport, in terms of progressive housing policy, and closing that inequality gap, which is shameful.
And before then, as we mentioned, we've got a general election and Brexit is dominating that. Can you tell us a bit more about plans for a Remain alliance with the Lib Dems and how the Greens would benefit from that?
Well, we are talking to other parties. It's completely right that we should be doing that kind of grown-up politics and working out the best way to make sure that there's still a Remain bloc within Parliament. I think in this election, it's very doubtful whether either the Conservatives or Labour are capable of getting a majority. I think the balance of Parliament is what is going to matter. The more Greens you have in the room, altering that debate, putting forward the bills, working together with other parties, the way we've seen Caroline Lucas doing, the better. And it's right that we talk to other parties about this, but nothing has been decided yet.
And how do you think it's going to play out? I ask every politician this always. Everyone hates it, but how do you see the next 6 months playing out?
I hope we will get the people's vote that we deserve. There are a majority of parties now in favour of that. We all need to work together in the new Parliament, whatever balance there is. Green voices in the room will be really clear in favour of getting that people's vote. And I think, although we all slightly dread having to vote again on Brexit, I'm very confident that Remain has a majority. The polls have shown that for about 18 months now, and that we'll stay in the European Union, and we'll wonder what on earth we were thinking.
And you mentioned that you had a to-do list of 8 things the minute you get into City Hall. Is there anything, what would be the first thing that you would change that one of the previous mayors has brought in?
I would cancel the Silvertown Road tunnel. That project absolutely needs to be off the books. There's no place for road building in a climate emergency. That's the number one thing that I would do, and it would take me very little time to get on with it.
And then in terms of a new policy on the environment, what sort of things can we be looking
Well, Centre for London published a really useful report recently looking at the opportunities for smart, fair, London-wide road pricing. I would add to that privacy-friendly as a criteria, and the mayor has been, I think, politically timid about looking at this. We really needed that to be brought in now. If I'd have been mayor in 2016, we wouldn't be seeing a limited ultra-low emission zone to the North and South Circular. We'd have that smart scheme covering all of London, which is fairer than a scheme that charges you one price for coming in for the whole day. That needs to be developed ASAP. So the second thing I'd do is get a team together and start them developing proposals for that. And the most important thing is that we embed privacy in that from the start. We're seeing too many problems with intrusion, too many technologies being used to monitor our citizens at the moment. But it's perfectly possible to put a road pricing scheme together that sorts that out too.
And then as a final question, a personal one. You've done this twice before. What have you learned? What are the sort of tricks of the trade for surviving the mayoral election campaign that you will be relying on this time to get you through?
Well, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't love election campaigning, and I'm very excited about the general election in the meantime as well, because that's what I like to do. What we did in 2016 is we put forward lots of good ideas that we wanted the mayoralty to take up, and so that's been my mission on the London Assembly, is to get as many things from my manifesto done by the mayor. And I think the things he talked about earlier on, funding for youth services, the rent controls, ballots for estate residents, those are all things he was not going to do until we made him do. So some of my ideas are already enacted. I've got a diagram. And the other things that are left over, things like closing City Airport, trying to get on with that. Things like flattening the fares. I mean, we're stuck with a fare zone system that's from the 1990s. People in outer London, I mean, despite what the mayor says about freezing fares, he hasn't frozen travel cards. So people from Zone 3 outwards are paying £200 more now than they were in 2016 for their fares. I said flatten the fares last time. This needs sorting out. We need to meet the train operating companies, untangle the fares, make sure that we can reduce the fares for people in outer London, and that's something that the Mayor's not taken up at all. So I've got ideas that are from last time that still need doing, and I'm working on new ideas for this election too, which you might have to wait a little bit for, but they're going to be just as much like, oh my goodness, yes, that's common sense, we must have that, as last time.
Well, we'll look forward to seeing you out on the campaign trail. Sian Berry, Green candidate for London Mayor, thank you very much.
Thank you.